As humans, we are often wont to seek the assistance of some unseen divine being to guide our brief speck through the fabric of time. Faith is a strong tool that can grant power to those that may sometimes be undeserving of it. However, even as we misplace our faith, do we deserve to be saved from our past transgressions? Quintet's ActRaiser, released for the Super Famicon in Japan in 1990, and the Super Nintendo Entertainment System in 1991 in NTSC territories, and 1993 in PAL regions, explores this theme. Before we jump in, I want to mention that the name Quintet sparked joy for me as a child. Their games never failed to put a huge smile on my face. Quintet's narrative often examined themes involving life, religion, faith, and the human condition. In fact, even though they were known as Shade by that point, the Grand Stream Saga was no different. It may be in your interest to check out my review of that game too. Due to the highly restrictive caveats that Nintendo of America placed on developers releasing titles in the West, it would be remiss of me not to mention the heavy censorship that ActRaiser faced. In Japan, ActRaiser sees you take on the role of God, guiding your humans by first defeating the monsters that inhabit their lands, then hearing their pleas. Your adversary is Satan, a demon that has sealed your power away, meaning your abilities to battle monsters and interact with your followers is limited. This is the true story of the game. However, due to the religious overtone and Nintendo of America's stance on such depictions within games on the Super Nintendo console, for the Western release, God was changed to Master, and Satan was changed to Tundra. Despite these name changes, anyone with logical reasoning skills will be able to determine that this game is about religion and faith. For the purposes of this review, I played the PAL version of the game on beginner difficulty. We begin the game as a Cupid-like angel awakes us from our slumber in the Sky Palace floating high above the world. The angel requests our name before advising us that they have been sent to assist with recovering our lost strength. Monsters are running rampant upon the earth, and it is up to us to dispatch them. As our strength has been sealed, we can only animate statues left behind after the monsters destroyed the earth, and use them to walk the land to battle our adversaries. The game is extremely linear, with progress being determined by completing regions in a specific order, unless you want to come up against monsters that are too difficult for you to defeat. Once you have selected a destination and chosen the battle option from the menu, you descend to brave the harsh, unforgiving environments of the ravaged world. Despite being made of stone, you have quite a bit of mobility, able to run and jump to avoid hazards. The statue comes equipped with a longsword with two blade-based techniques that it can employ. The first is a standard overhead swipe, which is useful for getting enemies that are slightly above or standing before you. The other is an arced underarm swing that is employed by first crouching then swinging your sword. This technique is best for taking out enemies closer to the ground, not to mention that crouching also allows you to sometimes avoid hazards and flying enemies. I found the hit detection of the blade was extremely fair and wide-reaching, meaning you didn't have to get a whiff of your adversary's sour breath in order to land a hit. So any time that I died, it was because of an overreach I made or a mistimed jump, not because I missed an enemy and it killed me. The jumping feels light and a little floaty, despite you being stoned, which made correcting a misstep easy. Like many of the games of its genre, enemies do cause a knockback when they hit you, so you must be careful not to take a stone to the face in the middle of jumping a gap, as I can assure you your footing will not find safe respite on the other side. Again, I must note some region differences. Spike traps in the PAL version are an instant death, as well as in the Japanese version. Those from the US got away with just a slight puncture wound. Nothing a bit of plaster won't fix, eh? If you find yourself surrounded by enemies, the Master has access to powerful spells that can help to navigate the treacherous terrain. These spells must be found through the simulation mode and equipped at the Sky Palace. Each spell costs one of your mana scrolls to cast, but this replenishes at the end of each act. I'd recommend preserving your magic and not using it until the end of the level though, as you'll often need to rely on it to beat the boss. At the end of each act there is a boss battle, with some skirmishes being a battle of attrition, especially if you've never fought the boss before. Within each act you are given 3 lives to complete the level and the boss. If you lose all your lives you will return to the Sky Palace and have to start the whole act again. I enjoyed that the levels progressively threw more traps and dangerous enemies at you to coincide with the character levels that you gained from completing the simulation aspects of the game. In Act 1, Fillmore, you don't really have anything other than basic enemies and thorny bushes to contend with. Comparatively, in some of the final levels you need to ride bubbles up the inside of a tree infested with poison, or descend a temple that is littered with a ton of instant death spike traps. Oh, also all acts are timed. If you don't complete the level within the time limit, you will lose a life. This was fine in the first couple of acts, but when the game required me to platform with the penalty being falling back to the beginning of the level if I missed a jump, this became quite stressful. I'd have been content without a timer. Once you complete the first act of an area, you restore some people back to their region of the world and then take control of the angel. Despite being a cherub, this angel is no Cupid, as it packs a punch with its arrows that can shred the monsters that remain dwelling in the skies over the various regions. In the simulation sections of ActRaiser, it is up to you to direct your people in how they should construct their town, and you can use miracles to assist or hinder their progress. For example, a lightning storm burns away bushes, whilst the scorching rays of sunlight can melt snow. Just be careful to pre-warn your people to wear SPF 30+ first. An earthquake, on the other hand, will destroy all structures that are not Civilization Level 3, as well as all crops that are not wheat. You can raise your civilization level by completing tasks such as sealing monster lairs, or by answering the prayers of your people though. The simulation mode also has a timer like the action segments, but it works in a different manner. Near the center top of the screen is an hourglass. Each time it completes a cycle, 1 year passes in the game world. When a new year begins, the town's construction mode will initiate, and people will dart out of the temple to find their best plot of land to build on, almost like a Black Friday sale. The hourglass passes in 4 segments, which represents each of the 4 seasons. I thought this was a nice touch, and you can see this best represented in the life cycle of the corn crops. Also, some events take some time to complete, such as when citizens decide to go on an expedition. You do want them to do this, as they can find items that will increase your pool of magic, or even grant you new spells to use in the action segments. In all, there are 6 regions that you must help, each with their own worries and troubles. In some instances you will need to travel between the regions, gifting offerings to help the lives of another area. Of the simulation aspect of the game, I enjoyed that you didn't have to micromanage resources or citizen contentness like you would in a game like SimCity. There was basically no stress to be had from any of the simulation aspect of the game, and no penalties for doing anything bad. So for example, you could cause an earthquake, and the only consequence is that people lose their homes. Your character level is tied to the world's population, but it never decreases even if the population falls below a threshold, which would only happen if too many monsters destroy people's homes, or you deliberately used your miracles to destroy them. Whilst I mentioned earlier that I liked the progression of difficulty in going through the various acts, one thing that I really did dislike was the fact that the final stage was a boss gauntlet that had you fighting 6 of the bosses that you had already battled, culminating in a final battle with Tanzra. If you haven't discovered any of the secret lives, you must do this gauntlet on 3 lives, and your magic does not replenish between each battle. This was an almost insurmountable task for me, as even the first boss, the Minotaur, was dealing out nearly as much damage to me as I was doing to it. One positive though, is that I liked the designs of the different bosses, and how they related to real-world mythology. For example, Fillmore Act 1's boss is a centaur, and like I said before, Act 2 is a minotaur, which are both from Greek mythology, whereas Aitos Act 1 has a giant green serpent that resembles the Uwabami, with the Act 2 boss being the Wanyudo, which is a Japanese yokai that is a burning wheel with the tormented face of a man in the middle from Japanese mythology. I thought this was really cool. The graphics for the simulation elements of the game aren't anything to get excited about, however I really appreciated the amount of detail that went into the backgrounds of the action stages. One moment you'll be fighting against the backdrop of brimstone-stained skies, darkening clouds racing by overhead, and the next you are deep inside an Egyptian temple, replete with giant figures of ancient pharaohs silently observing the scene. These elements help to draw me into the action, and feel the sense of awe and mystery of the various landmarks and ruins of the world that I was helping to restore. ActRaiser claims that music has the ability to heal the soul in a request where you take the gift of the creation of music from one land to solve the quarrels of another. Nothing has rung truer. I often put a little time into my reviews to mention the music of the games that I play, and this one is no exception. The action segments of the game all had great orchestrations that really got the blood pumping and helped me to focus on defeating the enemies that were standing before me. One complaint that I would have about the music is that the simulation segments all had the same track, except for the one exception where the gift of music changes the melody of 2 of the regions. I would have liked to have seen the main theme with different takes, using the same leitmotif and placing emphasis on instruments common to the region, such as Japanese wind instruments in Aitos, or sad yet hopeful violins in the Arctic North Wall. The other complaint I have is the buzzing noise that accompanies the talking text whenever someone speaks, whether it be the angel or your citizens. Just stop already. ActRaiser is a game that is quite short, standing at around 4 to 5 hours, or even less depending on how much time you spend on the simulation sections, as well as how good you are at the action sequences. With its unique blend of action platformer and simulation, the game never left me bored, and made me continue to enjoy my way through some of the sometimes unforgiving bosses in order to restore a little more of the world. Whilst the difficulty was mostly fair, I lament that the final boss gauntlet is near impossible on the PAL version of the game, even on beginner mode. If you want a short, fun little title to tide you over between bigger, longer games, then ActRaiser is definitely the game for you. By the way, I'm enjoying playing these shorter games between the bigger titles. Are there any short games that you'd recommend to me? Leave me a comment with what you've been enjoying recently. This has been Venoir with a review of ActRaiser for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. If you enjoyed this review, feel free to like and subscribe, as it helps me out a bunch. Thanks again as always, and I look forward to seeing you again next time. Bye bye for now.